At the couple's party, my wife said she was going to the bathroom and disappeared with another man, so I ran to them, and when she saw me, she was desperate, but nothing I said would change what I saw. I turned around and left, certain that this was where the us ended. And even though the pain pierced me like an invisible knife, it wasn't the shock that crushed me, nor the anger, nor the wounded pride. It was the silence. The silence between us when she tried to say something and no words made sense. The silence of her gaze, begging me not to believe what I saw. The silence of my heart, which, in that moment, understood that the love I gave, whole, innocent, strong, wasn't enough for someone who chose to lose themselves for so little. Until that night, I believed we knew what complicity was. I thought love was strong enough to overcome any disagreement, any emotional distance that sometimes grows between a couple after years together. But love, however pure, cannot survive disloyalty. Not when it's cold, self-conscious, and done in plain sight. I saw her laughing before entering the room with him, as if I didn't exist, as if I wasn't the one who paid for that dinner, that dress, those sleepless nights thinking about how to make her happy. I wasn't the one who disappeared from the party. I was the one who stayed. The one who stayed where she said she would return. I was the one who believed her, once again. The pain of seeing someone you love, someone who knows your silences and your routines, able to cross the line of trust with their own 2 feet, smiling, is something that cannot be explained in words. It wasn't the kiss that destroyed me. It was the neglect. It was the way she looked at him. It was the lightness of the touch, as if it had happened before. As if I was already out of the story before I even knew there was a story being written without me. She came after me, of course. Every betrayal is followed by regret, when the betrayed one reacts with dignity. And I did. I didn't make a fuss, I didn't cry in front of anyone. I just looked at her, in the eyes, and said what my heart already knew, that there was no bridge between us anymore. Only rubble. And the only thing you can do with rubble is leave it behind. She tried to reach me with words, with tears, with justifications that seemed written on wet paper. But what breaks inside someone when they're betrayed, and so publicly, so humiliatingly, can't be mended with promises. It can't be healed with regret. What's lost there is the soul of love. And without a soul, there's no new beginning. For a time, I walked aimlessly. The world seemed suspended, as if every sound were muffled by a layer of ice between me and reality. Worst of all was the memory. Every moment, she resurfaced. Her smell, her laughter, the notes left around the house, the way she held me close as we slept. All of this was replaced by a single, cruel scene, repeated over and over in my head, her with him. What shouldn't have happened, did. And what should have been eternal ended. And it didn't end because it stopped being love. It ended because love cannot survive disrespect. And betrayal is the most brutal way to disrespect someone who trusts you. But life has a silent way of rebalancing things. When the heart finally stops bleeding, it begins to relearn how to beat. And in due time, without looking for it, I found someone. Someone who asked me for nothing, simply offered me a sincere smile. A gentle silence. A peace I didn't even know I was looking for. It didn't arrive to cure anything, and perhaps that's why it cured everything. Little by little, the emptiness became a shelter. Sadness became a space for hope. And love returned, in a different form, with a different face. No games. No ghosts. No fear. As I moved on, she sank into memories. She sent long messages that I never responded to. She asked to talk, explaining that it had been a mistake, that she was confused, that she had gotten carried away. But none of these words could erase the fact that she had gotten carried away without thinking of me. Without thinking of us. She chose an adventure in the middle of a random night, and lost an entire life by my side. And by the time she realized it, it was too late. I saw her again, much later. Her hair was different, her eyes were tired, her voice trembling. I wanted to say so many things, perhaps I wanted to relive what no longer exists. But I just listened. Not for her, but for myself. Because forgiveness isn't for the one who betrayed. It's for the one who was betrayed to stop carrying the weight of what they don't deserve. And that's exactly what I did. I forgave. And I moved on. And she finally understood that some mistakes cost too much. But there's something she never knew. Something that began that very night at the party. A simple, almost insignificant detail that, if she had stopped to notice before entering that room with him, might have changed everything. Maybe it would have made her hesitate. And maybe, just maybe, everything would have had a different outcome. Perhaps the most surprising thing about this story wasn't even the betrayal. But rather what she lost, and what I found. The true love she threw away, didn't disappear. It was simply offered to someone who knew how to care. And this love, reborn, revealed something neither she nor I could have imagined. But the question that stuck in the throats of everyone who knew our story was, what really led her to cheat that night? And what did she see in my eyes, seconds before leaving that room, that made her understand that she would never be loved the same way again? Welcome to the channel. Here, we neither romanticize nor condone any form of betrayal. The stories told are fictional, but the feelings they evoke are real, and the lesson is clear: betrayal destroys lives, erodes bonds, and leaves scars that time cannot erase. Prepare now to immerse yourself in an intense, dramatic, and unforgettable narrative. Take a deep breath, because what you're about to hear will shake you. They met on an ordinary Sunday afternoon, in the kind of place where no one expects life to change. She was with a friend drinking coffee at a small bistro, and he was reading a book at the next table, distracted by the pages, oblivious to the world. Their encounter was nothing extraordinary, but it was there, in the brief exchange of glances, that something silent sparked between them. A subtle, unhurried interest, like the beginning of winter announced by the wind. Her name was Emily, his was Daniel. They were different in so many ways, but perhaps that was what made it all happen. Emily was passionate about art, spoke with her hands and eyes, and was in a hurry to live. Daniel was introspective, methodical, but with a discreet kindness that she sensed from the first moment. There were no tricks or strategies, everything was natural, light, as if they both already knew that life was about to intertwine. The beginning was calm, filled with conversations that stretched into the early hours, silent walks with intertwined hands and glances that said more than any words. Emily was surprised by Daniel's ability to listen to her. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge, just let her exist, with all her intensity and contradictions. To him, Emily was like a flame too beautiful to be contained, and perhaps that's why he worked so hard to keep it burning, even on the hardest days. By his side, she felt she could be herself, without masks, without having to pretend to be a more controlled version of herself. He was shelter. And she, the storm. They decided to move in together after 2 years of dating. The apartment wasn't large, but it had huge windows that let in the morning sunlight, and they made a point of having coffee together, even on the busiest days. There was a silent agreement between them to protect what they were building. Emily left some paintings around the house, Daniel set aside a corner for his books. And, without realizing it, they were shaping a home. Friends often said they complemented each other. That there was something beautiful about the way she made him laugh and the way he made her breathe calmly. There were nights when they would lie on the couch, sharing a glass of wine, and she would say, with a half smile, "We work well, don't we?" and he would just nod, because he never knew how to put into words how much she meant to him. Their life followed the usual rhythm of couples who share a routine. There were good days, bad days, fights over small things, and silent reconciliations with a touch on the arm or a coffee left on the table. Their strength lay not in grand displays of affection, but in small gestures. Daniel cared for Emily's car as if it were his own. She cared for his health as if caring for something too fragile to be forgotten. She bought vitamins, scheduled appointments, and organized his clothes in the closet with a delicacy that spoke volumes. But there were also gaps that grew without either of them realizing it. Emily was restless, wanting to travel, see the world, work on creative projects. Daniel was more stable, preferring security and routine, and fearing the unpredictable. These differences, which initially seemed charming, began to create subtle noises. She felt misunderstood at times, as if her ambitions had no place. He felt pressured, as if he were always trying to catch up with her in something that would never be his. But even in the most tense moments, there was respect. They never stopped talking, trying to understand each other, even if they were flawed. They wanted to make it work because there was love. Or at least, something very close to it. The years passed. Work, bills, expectations, social commitments. Time, once so full of possibilities, began to be divided into responsibilities. Weekly dates became the exception. Long kisses were replaced by quick ones before leaving. Passion gave way to familiarity. And yet, neither of them seemed willing to give up. Daniel insisted on keeping the rituals alive: breakfast together on Sundays, dinner on their anniversary, the note on the fridge on days she had important meetings. Emily, for her part, sought new ways to rekindle her feelings. She suggested trips, classes, dancing. Sometimes he accepted, other times he backed off. But she never stopped trying. On their 5th anniversary, he prepared a surprise. He took her to the place where they'd first met, reserved the same table, and there, amid glasses of wine and soft laughter, she cried. Not with sadness, but with gratitude. There was still love between them, even if it was covered by layers of time and wear. She held his hand and said softly, "Thank you for still being here." And he responded with a smile that, deep inside, hid a fear he couldn't name. A fear that all of this, one day, would no longer be enough. In the following months, life followed the natural course of those who fight for something they believe in. Daniel began planning a more structured future. He talked about buying a bigger house, perhaps in another city, where they could start over. Emily, at the same time, seemed on a different wavelength. She was more absent, involved in new projects, new friendships, new ideas. She said she was tired of repetition, that she missed lightness, spontaneity, experiencing new things. He listened patiently and responded with more practical proposals, trying to fit her dreams into their current reality. The chasm between them grew, but they kept going, like someone walking across a foggy bridge, unsure if there was still ground on the other side. The couple's party was the idea of a mutual friend. A sophisticated dinner with live music, good food, and unlimited wine. An event where every couple brought other couples, a grand celebration of lasting affection. Emily looked beautiful that night, and Daniel couldn't help but notice. She smiled lightly, wearing a red dress he had chosen from a shop window months earlier. He felt proud to have her by his side, to walk hand in hand amid admiring glances. And, for a moment, he believed everything was in place. That despite the difficulties, they were still together. That there was still a chance. During the party, they danced, laughed, chatted with friends, and toasted past stories. She was more relaxed than usual, and he, happy to see her in high spirits, didn't mind when she walked away saying she needed to go to the bathroom. It was just another ordinary night among so many they had experienced. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Nothing hinted that night, something would change forever. The clock ticked on, and the guests divided between dancing and chatting. Daniel remained at the table, looking around unhurriedly. He waited for her to return, as she always did. Unaware that night, something invisible was about to break. And when he finally got up to look for her, he didn't know that every step he took was leading him toward a point of no return. At that party, amidst yellow lights and romantic music, a love built on years of history, choices, forgiveness, and surrender silently moved toward its most fragile moment. A moment that hadn't yet happened, but already lingered in the air like a storm no one can predict until it's already happening. And there, unbeknownst to him, the next few minutes would transform everything he believed about love, loyalty, and choice. Because sometimes, what destroys a relationship isn't the end of love, but the breaking of the silent pact that sustains love even when it's in crisis. And in that festive atmosphere, amid raised glasses and distracted smiles, what no one could see was that something, for them, was already falling apart. And when the truth finally came out, there would be no going back. But until that moment, everything seemed normal. Beautiful. Light. Almost perfect. The music in the room had already changed tone, something slower, lulled by the last glasses of wine and loose laughter that was beginning to mingle with discreet yawns. The mood was late in the evening, when the cheerful masks begin to slip and fatigue reveals the true faces behind the social graces. Daniel, however, showed no signs of fatigue. Sitting at the table, his eyes restless, he checked his watch for the fourth time. 32 minutes since Emily had said she was going to the bathroom. His cell phone remained silent, no messages, no explanations. He glanced at the dance floor, the aisles, the neighboring tables, and an involuntary unease began to spread inside his chest, like a knot forming without him understanding exactly why. When he stood, it was slow, still trying to rationalize. Maybe she'd met a friend, maybe she was having a longer conversation in the hallway, maybe she just wanted to breathe a little away from the noise. But something in the air felt off, as if the atmosphere around him was about to shift. He walked through the hall with firm steps, but his heart was beginning to skip a beat. When he passed the side door, which led to a more private corridor with a few rooms rented out to couples who wanted to rest, he felt his throat dry. One of the doors was ajar, and for a second, his entire body hesitated. It wasn't the sound that drew him in, it wasn't any noise at all. It was the silence. A strange, dense silence, and a premonition that came from the depths of an instinct he hadn't even known he possessed. He approached, slowly pushed the door open, and there, time stood still. There was no scream. There was no explosion. There was only the collapse. Emily, there, with another man, her body on another's, her clothes out of place, her gaze desperate as she saw him standing in the doorway. Daniel said nothing. His eyes were glassy, his face pale, his fists clenched, but not out of anger, out of restraint. Because in that moment, he understood that everything he thought he knew about her, about them, was only part of the story. The part he believed to be true. Emily jerked away from her lover, tugging at her dress with trembling hands, stuttering incoherent words. The man, still stunned, tried to compose himself, but Daniel didn't even look at him. His gaze was fixed on her, and what was there was something more painful than fury. It was the death of a faith. Emily tried to get closer, repeating his name, begging him to listen, that it meant nothing, that it wasn't what it seemed. Daniel stopped her with a single gesture. He raised his hand, took a deep breath, and took a step back. His gaze was too calm for what was happening. And it was that calm that made her tremble. Because she knew. She knew that what had ended there wasn't just one night. It was everything. Without saying a word, he turned and left. With each step, pain tore through him, but he forced himself to continue. In the parking lot, he got into his car, started the engine, and sat for a few seconds in silence. His body trembled, his stomach churned. It was as if he had just witnessed the burial of a part of himself. And in a sense, he had. In the days that followed, Emily tried. Messages, calls, audio messages, letters. She asked to talk, explaining that she'd had too much to drink, that she was confused, that things between them had been strange for months. She said she needed to feel alive, wanted, that she hadn't considered the consequences. But none of that found space in Daniel. The love that existed between them had been torn apart in seconds, with the cruelty of an unwavering gesture. He didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't retaliate. He just walked away. And that hurt her more than any explosive reaction. Emily, desperate, went to his parents' house. She tried to talk to her sister. She reached out to mutual friends. Everyone, little by little, drifted away. Because there was a line one couldn't cross with impunity. And she crossed it. Alone in the apartment where they'd lived together, surrounded by objects that now seemed to mock her, she lived days of silence and remorse. His perfume still lingered on the towels, his books still occupied a shelf she couldn't bring herself to touch. Longing was like a ravenous animal devouring her from the inside out. And at some point, the penny dropped, she hadn't just lost the man she loved. She'd lost his respect. And without respect, there's no way back. A few weeks later, Emily decided to go to the coffee shop where it all began. She sat at the same table, ordered the same coffee. Deep down, she hoped that chance would deliver a miracle. That he would appear, that he would sit across from her, that they would say everything that had been left unsaid. But it wasn't Daniel who walked through the door. It was a woman. Beautiful, serene, with a calm smile. Emily recognized her by sight, she was a friend of his sister's. The two greeted each other with a distant wave. And that was when she saw it. Daniel arrived minutes later, holding the woman's hand. He sat with her at the same table where, years ago, he and Emily had begun a story. The woman caressed his hand affectionately. He smiled. A smile Emily hadn't seen in a long time. There, she understood. It wasn't just regret. It was loss. Complete loss. Definite. Daniel had moved on. And with him, the love she'd once thrown away. She stood there for a few minutes, staring at that seemingly impossible scene. And when his eyes met hers for a brief second, he simply held her gaze, without anger, without hurt. Only peace. Emily collapsed inside. She stood up slowly and left the cafe unnoticed. It was as if she were now invisible to the world that had once been hers. The months that followed were difficult. She tried to start over, met other people, but nothing was the same. No look, no touch, no conversation carried the same weight, the same surrender, the same truth. Because some people are irreplaceable. And Daniel was one of those rarities. A man who loved her completely, who chose to be by her side every day, even when the world said love faded with time. She, however, chose the gap, the moment, the vanity. And she lost everything. Their final attempt at reconciliation came on a cloudy afternoon. She waited for him to leave work and approached him with teary eyes. She told him she still loved him, that she had learned from her mistakes, that she would do anything to rebuild what had been destroyed. Daniel listened, silently. As he always did. And then he responded calmly. He said he didn't hate her, that he held no grudges, that he understood that people make mistakes. But he had also changed. That the love he felt for her, however genuine it had been, no longer lived within him. He said that forgiving was a choice, but loving again was not. And that he had already chosen to love someone else. Someone who arrived without hurting, without betraying, without lying. Emily cried. She cried like someone who finally understands that certain decisions cannot be undone. And Daniel simply hugged her, respectfully. One last hug. No promises, no hope. Just a goodbye. And in that moment, she knew. That he had found something she had, on impulse, destroyed. And that something would never return. What she didn't know, and perhaps never will, is that the moment she walked through that door that night at the party, she left behind not only the man who loved her, but the version of herself he loved. And that version, the one he viewed with admiration and care, died right there. Because Daniel didn't just lose trust. He lost the image of her that lived within him. And when that image shattered, no amount of apology could rebuild it. The betrayal was the act. But the loss, was what came after. Silent. Profound. Irreversible. Emily took a while to accept his absence. At first, she believed that time would heal the wounds, that all she had to do was persist, write, try again, reappear in the places where he used to be, get mutual friends to intercede for her, tell her side of the story until, perhaps, he would relent. But time didn't heal, time only made clearer what she had destroyed. What had been crushed by the weight of her own choice couldn't be mended with words or promises. Emily spent months immersed in a frustrated attempt to rebuild herself atop the rubble of a life she herself had reduced to dust. She moved to a new apartment, cut her hair, invested in new social circles, and started therapy. But the truth was, she was no longer the same, not because she had changed, but because she had broken in a way that nothing external could mend. Every new attempt to move forward was confronted by flashes of what she had lost. The spontaneous laughter alongside someone who looked at her with genuine eyes, the Sunday morning coffees filled with comfortable silences, the way he'd wait for her outside work just to make sure she didn't walk home alone on rainy days. It was these small, intimate memories that now hurt more than the scene of her discovery. Because what consumed her wasn't remorse for being caught, but the deep regret for having left aside what truly mattered. She found herself surrounded by people who knew nothing of the whole story. Some judged her, others consoled her with clichés. But no one there knew the version of herself that existed when she was with Daniel. The version he saw. The one that was only possible because he saw her through the eyes of someone he loved without reservation. That version was lost forever, and Emily began to understand that it wasn't just his love that had disappeared, but also the best of herself. Trying to fill that void, she plunged into quick relationships, attempts at distraction, fake smiles for photos, weekends full of people but empty of meaning. No touch soothed, no gaze welcomed. Not because no one else was capable of doing so, but because she no longer knew how to receive. She lost her self-confidence. And, above all, she lost the certainty that she deserved something real. When she saw Daniel for the last time, she no longer expected to get back together. What she wanted was to understand how he managed to move on with such ease. His face held peace, and hers, guilt. She asked if he still remembered what they'd experienced, and he replied, gently, that he remembered everything, but without the pain. And it was in that moment that Emily understood the worst punishment. She remained a prisoner of the past, and he, free. He forgave her, but not to get back together. He forgave to release what held him captive. And she? She remained trapped in the moment she chose to date another man and destroy everything they had. Meanwhile, Daniel had discovered the tranquility of a serene love. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't a replacement, it wasn't an attempt to heal the pain with someone else. It was a slow process of internal reconstruction, of accepting loneliness as part of mourning, of relearning to live with one's own silences. He dedicated himself to work, resumed hobbies he'd neglected, and started going out with friends who had always been there. He wasn't looking for anyone. But when she arrived, the woman with the sweet smile and silent soul, there was no fear, no urgency. There was recognition. A kind of connection that didn't need to prove anything, because it came laden with calm. With her, Daniel discovered that love can also be light. That trust can be born effortlessly, when both arrive whole, without remnants of other unfinished loves. This new woman didn't want to fix anything in him. She simply accepted him. And it was precisely for this reason that, little by little, he fell in love again. Their wedding was intimate, discreet, surrounded by a few people, but full of truth. And in every detail of that day there was a silent message: it is possible to start over without carrying the weight of what was done to us. Daniel never hid his story, but he also never used it as a shield. He knew who he had been, what he had given, what he had suffered, but he didn't let it define him. He transformed pain into wisdom. Betrayal into learning. Loss into maturity. When he looked at his new wife, he saw someone who never had to compete with the past, because she knew how to arrive at the right time, in the right way. And because of that, it was easy for him to love her without ghosts. No scars bled anymore. Years later, during a get-together with acquaintances, an old friend from long ago mentioned that she had run into Emily. She said she was living alone, teaching, with a melancholy expression. She said she still spoke of Daniel from time to time, like someone carrying a memory they don't want to forget. He simply smiled and changed the subject. Not out of indifference, but because it no longer touched him. His heart was now home to a new love, and there were no more empty spaces. Emily, for her part, moved on with her life. He continued his classes, his monotonous days between the gym, work, and the occasional attempt to smile on social media. Sometimes he looked at the old wedding ring he still kept in a box, as if it were a reliquary of a better version of herself. The only concrete reminder that she had once been truly loved. She knew no one saw her in the same light anymore. She knew that, no matter how hard she tried to explain what happened that night, she would never be able to accurately describe what went on inside her to cast away what so many people spend their lives trying to find. And it consumed her. Because regret doesn't fix the past, it only destroys the future. At the end of this story, it's impossible not to reflect on the fragility of human bonds. How everything can crumble because of a poor choice, an impulse, a moment of selfishness. How easy it is to forget the value of those who walk beside us, simply because we've grown accustomed to their presence. Betrayal doesn't just destroy the relationship, it corrodes the very identity of the perpetrator. And even when forgiveness arrives, it doesn't have the power to restore what was lost. Forgiveness is about liberation, but not about rebirth. And the cruelest thing is realizing that sometimes, the betrayer doesn't want to leave. They simply want to test whether they'll be forgiven, and, in the process, destroy what can never be rebuilt. Comment below with your thoughts on this story. What would you have done in each character's shoes? Do you believe in forgiveness after betrayal? We'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel. Every week we bring you real stories from the soul, from life as it really is, with intense loves, human mistakes, and lessons that make us reflect. And never forget, this channel does not support any type of betrayal. All the stories here are fictional, created to clearly show how a thoughtless choice can destroy true love, an entire life, and leave wounds that not even time can erase. Because in the end, betrayal isn't just the breaking of a commitment, it's the silent destruction of everything that was built with love.